This is a better slide. The bowels, the lungs, absolutely everything can be affected. Okay. It's more common than you think. Roughly around 30 years of study, it shows that it's about 10 to 20% of the population have it. It is more prevalent in black people, and it is even more prevalent in women. Women have it much more frequently than men. And that's why, if you're a black woman, this is something you really need to think about. Back in England, I would say half of the women I come across who are black women have some sort of autoimmune problem. Simple as that. That is a branch of autoimmunity. So this is something that if you're a black woman, you need to listen to very carefully. Why does this happen? Why do our immune cells that are here to defend us start hurting us? Why does it happen? Well, most of it starts in the gut. And we call it a leaky gut. What do I mean by that? You see, our gut is perfectly designed to absorb everything we need to eat. We digest it, and we take those little molecules, amino acids, sugars, we absorb them into our bloodstream, but they have to go through just a single cell layer of the gut. That single cell, even though it is just so thin, it is absolutely brilliant. It takes in everything we need, and if we don't need it, it keeps it out. Beautiful. But sometimes that single cell layer breaks down. They separate from each other. Why does that happen? It can happen if you have an infection. It can happen if you're stressed. It can happen if you are on certain types of drugs like steroids, antibiotics. All of those things can create that leaky gut. Then what happens? Well, the proteins that are supposed to be digested before they get absorbed into the system, that are still quite big, they pass into the bloodstream when they shouldn't. And when that happens, your immune system, your antibodies, detect them and say, hey, this is foreign. It shouldn't be there. Let's destroy it. And when it's destroyed, the antibodies don't just stay there. They say, well, let's go and find something else that looks like what we've destroyed. So if they've been designed to destroy a certain code on a certain type of food, they will look around your body for something that looks similar. So if the joints of your bones look similar to what they've destroyed, they will then start to attack those joints of your bones. If it's in your brain, if it's in your bowel, the same thing. And so you now have this big army of autoantibodies that are now destroying our own bodies. Okay. Now, at the bottom of that slide you can see type 1 diabetes, because we've known this for a very long time. Type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune diabetes, not like type 2, can be triggered by what is written there, bovine protein. Now, bovine protein simply means protein from the cow, and the most common protein from the cow that triggers autoimmunity is milk protein. So milk proteins generate these antibodies that then start to attack our cells. We've been talking about that over the last few days. What else can cause the inflammation, the separation of your bowel, of your single cell layer? Sugar. You know, sugar doesn't make anything better. Always causes inflammation. It causes inflammation of the end organ, and it causes the guts to open up to let these big proteins through. Something else that can do it. So for example, if you have thyroid disease, you are almost certainly going to be susceptible not just to milk protein, but also to wheat protein. Now, why should that be? What's wrong with wheat? You know, wheat is a natural product. Why should our bodies react against it? Well, it's not so much the wheat. It's what we've been doing to the wheat over the generations. How we've adapted the wheat so it can survive different climate environments, what we put on the wheat, the certain pesticides we put on the wheat, that all triggers this autoimmune response. So when I'm treating people who have thyroid disease, the two things I make sure they stop eating are milk and wheat, at least for the first few months. And then we find that those antibodies start to die down because they don't remain, they go away. Again, that study from bovine protein. We know this is not natural. We don't promote it. We've said, in case you weren't here earlier, that the only animal that drinks milk into adulthood is us, human beings, and we're the ones suffering from all of these diseases. No animal really drinks the milk of other animals in the wild either. So it's something we need to learn from nature about. Now, when you're talking about autoimmunity, you really have to take in the sun. Now, why do I say that? Well, have a look at this map of the world. This is the multiple sclerosis map of the world. And what do I mean by that? All the highly colored areas that you can see, they have high levels of multiple sclerosis. The pink areas, the purple areas, very high levels of multiple sclerosis. As you go down, when you get to the equator, very few people have multiple sclerosis. So people did lots of studies and they said, well, why should it be that people on the equator have fewer episodes of multiple sclerosis? And they realized that it was the sun. The more sun you have, the fewer episodes of multiple sclerosis, and in fact, the fewer autoimmune problems you have. Now you might say, but you know, we live in a hot country and we've got lots of autoimmunity. The problem is we don't expose ourselves enough to the sun. You know, we need to get out into the fresh air, into the sun as often as possible with our shorts, with our t-shirts, and expose our bodies to the sun, let the sun get into our bodies, and then it will do its healing effect. Because vitamin D does something that no other drug can do. Vitamin D is what is generated when the sun hits our skin. Now what it does, it is able to suppress the autoimmune antibodies, but at the same time boost the good antibodies. There's no drug in the world that can do that. If you go to your doctor and you have an autoimmune problem, one of the drugs they'll give you are steroids. What do steroids do? They wipe out all of the immune system. So you are now vulnerable to things like cancers and infections. Vitamin D will boost those antibodies but suppress the bad ones. Now, how do you reverse autoimmunity? These are some of the basic things that I would suggest if you really want to put an arrest to autoimmunity. The first thing you have to do is remove all dairy and wheat products. I've just said that because your antibodies are being raised to the proteins within those proteins. The next thing is to eliminate refined sugar. It keeps coming up, refined sugar. The more refined sugar you have in your system, the more inflamed you're going to be. Now, I am not suggesting that you get rid of fruit. Fruit is not refined sugar. Fruit is the sugar designed for our bodies. That will not do you any harm, but it's the refined stuff that you see in the packets and the cans that you find in the supermarkets. Those are the ones that will make your life really difficult if you have an autoimmune problem. Most people who have an autoimmune issue will tell you that it gets worse when I'm going through stress. And that's exactly what happens, because going through stress, we release our own natural cortisol, which is like a steroid, which it is a steroid. So it will then suppress our immune system and the autoimmunity rises up even worse. You must have a healthy, balanced, plant-based diet. Trying to avoid the meat products, trying to avoid, as I've said, all of the dairy. If you have that, you're providing yourself all of these wonderful, natural antioxidants, anti-inflammatories. That's exactly what the beautiful colors of our food, beans, greens, vegetables, fruits, that's exactly what they do. Adding to it, I would say, add things like turmeric. Turmeric is a spice that is probably the most powerful antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, so take on that. Ginger also works well. Flax seeds are very good too because they will neutralize any of the estrogen in the system, and estrogen is constantly making you a bit more inflamed. I've said get out in the sun as much as you possibly can.